And now, if you allow me, I'll spend a little bit of time to tell you about the foundation that we founded, and I guess the sort of binding force of all of these meetups that happen around the world. Someone asked me about the mailing lists. Yes, I will send you the mailing list of everyone so you guys can do business. In fact, if you start a company as a result of meeting someone here, remember us, don't forget us, right? But no, in all reality, we've conducted over 150 meetups in 40 countries around the world. And always with the mission of connecting Bosnians and Herzegovinians around the world, no matter what they do, who they are, but ultimately to give you guys a bit of an insight in terms of what you're all doing. And I think you had a chance to hear what everyone is doing here. It's quite incredible. I think if we started the company with the people in this room here, we'd have a very, very high chance of success, given the breadth of knowledge that we have in the room and given the experience and age and the gender diversity and everything else that's found in this room. So big thank you for taking the time to come out here on a Friday night. There's a lot of other things you could have been doing, but from me, big thank you for coming along and for spending a little bit of time with us. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our foundation. So I gave this presentation at a conference last year in Sarajevo, and I thought, you know what, I can't design new slides. I'm horrible at designing slides. So they're going to be very plain, but hopefully what I say is more important than what's on the slide. But I think the two will work hand in hand. So my presentation is titled From Idea to Global Community, because essentially the foundation was just an idea, a couple of people sitting down and thinking, how can we give back to this country, because we're sick and tired of people talking about all the negative things that happen in Bosnia. You know, when you go over there, people are always talking about how this doesn't work and that doesn't work. And I just didn't want to be another person that had a beer or a glass of wine or sat over a coffee and talked negatively about Bosnia. I wanted to contribute. But as a youngster coming through Australian education system, I didn't know how to contribute, and I thought to myself, one day I will, but how I will do that will depend on certain things in life. And that actually happened. So fast forward, what now, 10 years since we started this whole story. We've done a lot of good work. Some of you follow our work, so you know sort of what we do, but I think a lot of you will be surprised about the breadth of work that we do. And I would love at the end of this evening to get as many of you involved in what we do, in whatever way you feel comfortable, in whatever capacity you feel comfortable. No pressure, but I think you'll like what we do, and probably at some point you'll get involved with our work. But I always ask people, why do you come out to events? I typically do a little bit of this, and I put the last word, belonging, because it may not be the first thing that you think about. Like you said, I want to meet people to work with, I want to meet like-minded people, I want to build a network, I want to start a business, I want to employ someone. There's a million and one reasons you can decide to come along. But I think deep inside you, there's a sense of, I want to belong. And I think that means very different things to people depending on where you grew up, who your network is, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're all looking for a sense of belonging. And I started to explore this word belonging. By the way, I'm an engineer by trade. So I studied electrical engineering. I was professor at university for 15 years. I quit my job in December. I now work in private industry. But ultimately, the one thing that was always deep inside me, the drive that I had, was to connect people and also to have a sense of belonging. And because I grew up in another country, not in Bosnia, there was this driving force behind me to tell me, you need to belong to that community. But how you belong to that community can be very different depending on, as I said, the network of people, your parents, your family, and also where you're located. So I started to explore this word, belonging, and what that actually means. And this may be somewhat boring for people, so I sort of digested it down to a few sentences. But this very famous professor, Carl Rogers, he actually tried to explain what belonging is, and he described it as, it's defined as a unique and subjective experience that relates to a yearning for connection with others, the need for positive regard and the desire for interpersonal connection. And I think if you read that sentence there, you fully understand that part of the reason why we're here tonight is also belonging. But I started to think about this much, much deeper, and I won't read this to you, but I summarized it in a very, very simple way that people can understand. Those two paragraphs literally boil down to two things. I want to be a part of something that has meaning. So I want to be a part of a community that has meaning to me. It might be cultural, it might be religious, it might be work, it might be national, it might be, there's a million and one things. And the second one that really boils down to is, I like this sense of belonging and I want to grow. So that means that we are driven by the fact that if something is really good and we're a part of it, we have a nature to actually go and pull people in. And that's kind of the driving force of what I do. I think what we're doing is amazing. And I think when I explain to people what we do, they find it also amazing. So it's my duty to pull people in and say, come and join this community and make a contribution to the community. And that's essentially what this community is. So I mentioned before that my life started in a city called Tuzla. I'm not sure if there's anyone here from Tuzla. Oh, well, a few people. Excellent, excellent. And my life changed in 1991, much like many of your lives changed in 1991. I actually left Bosnia before the war. My father tried to prevent reservists from Tuzla going to Croatia to go to war. They were not informed about what was going on in Croatia. They were being sent basically to be frontline soldiers in someone else's war. And he prevented these soldiers going to war, and immediately the next day he was proclaimed enemy of the state. He had to flee the country, so we had to flee the country before the war. So that one split decision that my father made to try and prevent people from being killed ended up changing our life, ended up pushing us into the world. We spent 3.5 years in Switzerland as refugees. Many of you spent time in different countries, then Canada as well. And then we ended up in Australia. And that whole refugee mindset gave me a real driving force in life. One, because my parents sacrificed a lot to ensure that my brother and I, my younger brother and I, had a better opportunity at life, and they sacrificed their careers to give us a chance. So I always had a force. I have to be the best. I have to be really successful, if anything for my parents, but then personally because I also wanted to prove that despite this small country with 3.5 million people, we have a lot of talents and we really can punch well above our weight. So my life was always formed by different experiences from the war, going to Australia, striving for excellence, that I always wanted to belong to that Bosnia and Herzegovina community, despite the fact that I spent 30 years in Australia. And many of you, some of you were even born in Canada, and yet you still have this sense of belonging. It's a very, very powerful force, and if unleashed in the correct way, it can achieve a lot of things. So today, our foundation, which I'll explain what it does, is a thriving community of about 15,000 people. Now, people say, what does that mean, 15,000 people as in the community? These are various stakeholders. There are people there who are donors. Rasim was one of the first donors in our foundation when we started the campaign. There are people who are speakers, there are mentors, there are workshop facilitators. There are mothers and fathers and grandparents who host students in Norway, in Sweden. Nina, you were staying in an apartment of Almir Beljak, is that correct? There you go. So people are making contributions in different ways, but also there are lots of people who follow us on social media, and I say I appreciate every like, comment, click, because it helps us reach bigger audiences. So the community is growing and our work is growing, but also the advocacy for our work is growing. So it's a big community of people that are like-minded, looking to achieve great things. But just to rewind where it all started, this is my brother and I back in 1992 in Switzerland. We were refugees, and you can see us counting money, and that was the first 100 Swiss francs that we earned. So in 1992, 100 Swiss francs was a lot, especially for two kids who were 8 and 9 years old. So I remember receiving a backhander from my father because he thought we robbed someone. So how does a kid at 8 years old get 100 Swiss francs? We started learning about how to make a few bucks, and we figured out the Swiss people were very conscious about recycling, and that when you return plastic and plastic bottles and various other plastic products and glass, you can earn half a franc or 1 franc. So obviously we were forcing our parents to buy more bottles of drink than they needed to. And then we realized the father has a limited budget, so you can't exactly force him to buy 100 bottles. But we very quickly figured out that our neighbors also have bottles. People were lazy to return those. We started returning them. Then we got the whole refugee community involved. So before you know it, we had this little business of recycling bottles. But then I recall very vividly, we were sitting down and counting this money. You can see some coins there and so on. And I asked my brother, what do you want to do with this money? And I recall him saying, let's help Bosnia. And I'm like, you know, that for me, at a 7 or 8 year old kid, and I recall us sending packages back to Bosnia because we wanted to help people. They didn't have food, they didn't have clothing. It was a very tough time. But even then we were thinking, okay, how can we make our contribution as kids? But what we said to each other at that time, obviously as kids we dream, we said, you know, I promise that one day when I have a lot of this, I'm going to help people who have very little of this. We didn't understand philanthropy, we didn't understand what that meant in reality and how it was going to come together. But many years later, obviously we formed this foundation. But when we started to think about how do we actually make a contribution, it's quite complex. So my brother's a civil engineer, I'm an electrical engineer. I worked at university, has a private company. We had no idea how to help people in Bosnia. Obviously we heard about people sending money, but we also knew that 20 years we've been sending money, we haven't really made a huge impact in Bosnia. You know, we fixed a few roads, we patched up a few facades, we sent a few people abroad, but we haven't really made a big difference in terms of the culture. We haven't made a real big difference in terms of the infrastructure to support that growth, and we haven't really taken the best of our minds around the world and injected that knowledge at a grassroots level. So, of course, me being a professor at university, what do? You go and do some research. So you go and read a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm sure you know about this as well. When you research conflict and when you research how to help people, it's a very, very broad topic. So you can read on days and days and days, but you go and do something. And what happened to me was in 2015, I was a young professor. I was sitting on a board, this IEEE, which is the Institute of Electrical Electronic Engineers. It's basically the largest home for engineering professionals. And I was sitting on this board here as the youngest board member. I'm not sure, it's a small photo, but you can see me here. I was a lot younger back then, didn't have any grey hairs. And I got an email from this lady here. She's also a professor in Sarajevo. Maybe some of you know her, if anyone's from Sarajevo. Her name's Dušanka Bošković. And she said to me, oh, wow, you sit on this board. Do you know how important your role is? I'm like, well, I didn't know it was that important. Can you come to Sarajevo and give a lecture to our students? Now, at that point, I had given hundreds of lectures in various countries, but I've never given a lecture back in Bosnia. So for me, one, I was very nervous because they may ask me to speak in Bosnian. And yes, I can speak the language, but speaking it like this and speaking it in a professional sense and explaining what I do in terms of my research, I knew that was going to be a nightmare. But what ended up happening is I went to this lecture, and there were 100 students in that lecture hall, and I decided to completely flip the conversation. And I didn't want to talk, I just wanted to hear their experiences. So we ended up spending 3 hours speaking to 100 students at the Faculty of Electrical Engineering, what challenges they had as students from the grassroots level all the way to the career projection level. And this thing just went on and on and on, and the whole time I was just writing notes. And they were all confused why someone would come from another country who was supposedly smarter than them, which I would debate any day, some super, super smart kids there. And I just wrote down things, and I wrote down, and this was before ChatGPT, so I couldn't really summarize that in a very effective and easy way. But it boiled down to a lot of different problems in the country. And I thought to myself, okay, I know what some of the problems are now. Some of these I can solve, low-hanging fruit right away. Some of these are long-term, but I need people, I need resources to do this. And I remember standing up in front of them, promising them 3 things. One, we're going to give a whole bunch of scholarships next year. I didn't know how, I didn't know from where, but we're going to do it. I made that promise. The second thing I promised to them is that I was going to pay for all of their memberships to join IEEE. And the membership at the time was like $27 US, so you can times that by 100 students. I didn't see there were 100 students in the audience, so I thought, yeah, there's maybe 20, 30 students there. So I ended up spending a lot of time with my credit card because I didn't want to give my credit card to them. So I spent a lot of time online registering people for membership. And the third thing that I said was probably the most important thing, that we were going to have a conference next year which was going to start this community that we envisaged. Then I went back to Australia and told my brother what I promised, and he was just appalled. He's like, how are we going to do this? Who's going to do this? We can give the money, but who's going to do this conference, etc., etc. But we set ourselves on a mission, and then we did some more research after that. So we decided that, not everything can be planned. You can't research everything. You just have to get your hands dirty and start working. But we did some more research, and I came across this really, really important statement here. I know a few people into economics here. I'm not an economist, but I got involved in economics because it was just a fundamental part of what we needed to do. I read this Harvard Business report that basically said a country's wealth correlates with its collective knowledge. And that was the most powerful statement. So this report, by the way, is like 180 pages long. And there was just one sentence that was important to me, and that one sentence that meant the world to me. Why? Because I didn't think about a country's wealth, its collective knowledge in terms of who lives in Bosnia, but I thought about collective knowledge about Bosnian community globally. And I knew that we had incredible people doing incredible things, and I also knew that no one ever made the effort to map this community. It's just an enormous exercise. And who's going to pay for that? So we ended up utilizing this statement. But what I also figured out is that you can have this collective knowledge, but unless this collective knowledge has a binding force into doing something effective, then it's just collective knowledge that's out there in the ether. Pretty much like this room here. A lot of smart people in this room here. But on your own, you can't achieve anything. But if you join forces around a particular idea, it's incredible what you can achieve when you digest the workload. And that's exactly what we did. We figured out that we can do that with this community. I then found out that we had approximately 2 million people living abroad. It's quite incredible that we have 2 million people living abroad. And obviously about 500,000 people of Bosnia Herzegovina descent live in Northern America. So that's Canada and the United States. Obviously, you can see some other maps and so on. Now, this is maybe 3 or 4 years old. I know that we have people living in China, we have people living in Africa. I've met people in 42 or 43 countries who originate from Bosnia, either first, second, or third generation. And I've traveled to 115 countries around the world, so I can say that as a fact. People are doing unbelievable things, and a lot of them under the radar. You will never hear about them. So I made it my mission to go and discover as many of these people as I could, partly because I sit on various boards and they pay for me to travel. So when I come to Canada, I'm going to collect with Bosnian people. So that's what I do. And of course, that meant that we had to take an approach to solving problems in Bosnia. And as you will all know, we often try to portray this, change coming from politics. Politicians would make these changes. Then we get very frustrated because Bosnian politics is the most dysfunctional politics in the world. It has the most complex government. There are so many layers of management. You feel like you're working in a corporation, embedded in a corporation, embedded in a corporation, and then some more corporation on top. And it just doesn't go anywhere. So we knew that any kind of change that we wanted to implement had to come from the bottom up. That meant at the grassroots level. But the grassroots level also means that you have to inject some of the world's best ideas into young people before they're corrupted by the system. And we know that in every home, parents will never tell their kids, one day when you grow up, you're going to be a politician and you're going to learn how to steal money out of the budget. No one ever does that. So the question is, why does that happen? Because at a certain age, things that are not normal in our reality become normal because everyone's a part of it. So if everyone's a part of it, it just becomes acceptable. So we are trying to target young people at an age before the system gets a grip of them and before it corrupts them. And if it doesn't corrupt them, it will eject them out of the country, like many people leave because they just can't tolerate what they see in front of them. So we have a very much bottom-up approach, and that's what we did. We started very small. In 2016, we organized the first conference. Now, this is just a conference just like any other conference, except I made it my personal mission to try and bring students from Banja Luka, from East Sarajevo, Tuzla, Mostar. And you guys know, constitutionally, Bosnia is a nightmare. And the reality is that we have these 2 entities and we have cantons and we have various other administrative units. But getting students from one entity to another entity to collaborate and work together seems like a perfectly normal thing, but it's an extremely difficult thing to do because management of various universities won't necessarily be very kind to the idea. So we did that in 2016. I went and spoke to the deans of all the universities, and I recall 2 very powerful stories from 2016. One very good friend of mine now, his name is Nemanja, he lives in Banja Luka. He told me years later, do you remember that Congress in 2016 when I came from Banja Luka? I was shit scared when I came to Sarajevo. And of course for me, that was a bit strange. But he explained to me, my whole life I've been told when I go to Sarajevo as a Serb from Banja Luka, some Bosniak in Sarajevo is going to hang me. Now, I laughed at that, but the reality is that is true. That is true, not in the sense that someone will hang him, but it's true that people actually believe that. The following year, we organized a conference in Banja Luka, and I had a parent from a kid in Zenica call me and say, I can't have my daughter going to Banja Luka. She's very religious, we're a very religious family. She's covered up. If she goes to Banja Luka, someone is going to stone her. I've heard they stone people who are covered in Banja Luka. Now, these are the stories that get propagated in the local communities and they grow and grow and grow, creating more and more fear and more divide. So the goal here was to connect as many young people to do constructive and meaningful things, as opposed to, let's bring young people together and let's talk about peace. You don't need to talk to young people about peace because young people were not involved in the war. So the whole concept of peace, talking to them, it doesn't make any sense. They don't understand these concepts. So what we do is we give them constructive ways to bring together, to work together on projects, to actually contribute to their local communities, but do that into these interdisciplinary teams, intercultural teams. And it saddens me to say that this is a big deal in Bosnia when you have Serbs, Croats and Bosniaks working together and people from mixed marriages. In Bosnia it's like, wow. But in Canada it's a normal thing. People do that all the time. In Australia people do that. It's a normal thing. One day it'll be a normal thing in Bosnia as well, but it wasn't at the time when we started and we started to grow this thing. So thanks to these, we were talking about LinkedIn earlier on, and we said how powerful LinkedIn is a tool. If LinkedIn didn't exist, this event would not have happened. And not just this event, our foundation would not be what it is today. Because we would not be able to connect so easily with so many professionals. We would not know what you do. We would not know what companies you work for. It would just be nearly impossible. So we utilize all of these social media platforms to connect and build connections. So my obsession, and many of you will know this already, is I am a Bosnian Pokemon collector. Okay? At first I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, I know this person here, I know this, and then all of a sudden I realized, shit, I'm addicted to this. I'm really addicted to this. And my father would always say to me, don't tell me you're going to another meetup. Where are you going now? Iceland. Who the hell lives in Iceland? Which Bosnian people are in Iceland? But ultimately, I became obsessed with connecting Bosnians no matter where they were. And what ended up happening is all these people also became addicted to connecting with the community, and the community just starts to grow. And organically just started to grow and grow and grow. And as a matter of fact, we now have this enormous community, and these people are all looking to contribute. Some of them are contributing at the local government level, some of them are contributing at the local university level, some are contributing to industry, some are mentoring students. There is incredible stuff going on. It does not end up in the media as much as I'd like to, even though I make a conscious effort to push as much content into the media. Mia mentioned before, I put Mia into the media not long ago, and she was bombarded by various media agencies. But the point is, we need to get these good stories out there, and that requires a community effort to achieve it. It's not an easy thing to do. In that time, from 2014 to 2024, I have flown 2 million kilometers. In fact, not long ago, I was at the airport and they told me, you hit 2 million kilometers. Now, to think about how much that is, an around the world ticket is about 40,000 kilometers. So Melbourne to Sarajevo one way is 15,500 kilometers. So you can just imagine how many times I've flown to Bosnia and back, to the US and back, to Canada, to Iceland, to South Africa, to Japan. It's a lot of flying back and forth. And I did get tired of it, but ultimately it's a time sacrifice, and it boils down to one fact, that people take you a lot more seriously when you turn up face to face. And I always teach this to my students as well. When you write an email for a job application, it's the easiest thing to reject. I can just swipe and dump it in the rubbish bin. If you call, I at least have to be polite and say, hey, how's it going? You know, if it's an unsolicited telemarketing call, I'm probably going to hang up anyways. But if you make a conscious effort, it's much harder to knock that back. But if you come along and knock and say, how are you doing? My name is so-and-so, dressed nicely, very polite, and I have something meaningful to say, people will give you at least 30 seconds of their time. And if you're lucky, they'll give you a few minutes. And if you're really lucky, they'll invite you, like Bosnian people do, come into my home, come and have something to eat, let's talk. And that's exactly what happens in my community. The importance of face-to-face can never be discounted. I'm not going to talk about both of these guys, but I think it's very important for you to understand how these connections really happen. This gentleman on the left-hand side here, some of you know him. Put your hand up if you know the guy on the left here. Okay, you do, yeah? His name is Almir Brljak, and I met him not that long ago, but it's thanks to him and also thanks to Ali and the guys here that we're having this meetup. So 2 years ago, he was in Sarajevo wandering on a cold winter night, and someone messaged me on Instagram and said, hey man, I'm exploring Sarajevo. I saw you had a conference here. My name is Almir. I'm from Canada, originally from Novi Travnik, etc., etc. What do? I'm like, listen, I'm at a bar having a drink, so just come and join us and we can talk about it then. 12 months later, Almir Brljak was a keynote speaker talking about the gaming industry and his company, Sin Studio, in front of 500 young people in Skenderija Dom Mladih. So that's how we make these connections happen. And so he did that, and he's part of the community now as well. I won't talk about this other guy, but he works for Apple and he reports directly to Tim Cook. But you guys should definitely connect with him if you have a chance. So this is something that everyone knows about, but I can't re-emphasize enough how important it is to go together. And I think tonight is about being together and trying to figure out what we can do together. Whether it's a small or large thing, there has never been a better time and more important time to build a network and use that network to do something constructive. I know for some of the young people in this room, you know, at the moment you're thinking, I want to get my first job. I want to go on a around the world trip. I want to buy myself a car. I want to buy myself a nice apartment. Then I want to go on a holiday to Hawaii or maybe Bahamas or Dominican Republic or wherever. People in Canada go for holidays. I've heard Dominican Republic's a hotspot. But once you do all of that, and you will, believe me, you will. I was in that position. I thought to myself, I can't wait to get a really nice car. I got that really nice car. Once you do all of those basic things, once you satisfy the basic human needs, then you'll start to think about, okay, I'm now getting to an age, what contribution do I want to make to this world here? Like, what is my legacy going to be? Am I just going to be another person that just gets more and more materialistic things into my life and hope that creates happiness? Or am I going to find something that's much bigger than me, a problem that I want to solve? And you know that you can't solve it on your own, and then you try and find that community you want to solve it with. So all I'm saying is, don't wait till you're 60 or 65 or 70 when you retire to be philanthropic, to volunteer, to donate to communities, to help. Do it now. Create the culture of giving back now and give it as much as you can, obviously proportionally to what you have available, but more importantly, your time is of high value. And people always say, well, do I belong to this community? So here's some key words that describe me, because people talk about hashtags to describe who you are. So I use hashtags to describe who I am in a way, that people can understand. And if any of these words, even a single word or two words, resonate with you, then we have something in common. We have something to work on. The problem in Bosnian communities, not just Bosnia, and Serbia and Croatia and the Western Balkans in general, is that we tend to exclude each other very, very quickly. Oh, you like that politician, I like this politician, we can't talk, I'm sorry, goodbye. And I'm like, hold on a second, but all of these other things here we have in common. So you're telling me because you like this politician, I like this politician, we can't work on any of these other things together? And that's what Bosnian politics boils down today. If you look at what people are projecting into the public, it's about finding things to differentiate on as opposed to things that bring us together. Well, my policy is I can find one thing in common with you, I'm going to work with you on that one thing to make that one thing better than what it is right now. And I think we all need to take that mindset if we want to make a difference. So if you affiliate with any of these words, you're in my community. Here's what Bosnia Herzegovina Futures Foundation does. We are basically an incubator and accelerator of human potential. So people always say, scholarships, etc., etc. Yeah, that's fine. We give scholarships, we send people abroad, we do internships, conferences, we do 1,000,001 things. But ultimately what we do is we want to take people in Bosnia and make them a better version of themselves. And that doesn't mean taking the smartest people in the country and making them just a little bit more smarter. It actually means taking people from the bottom layer and from the middle layer and projecting them to that higher level of success, whatever that may mean in them. And we do that by instilling some really important core values into them. Entrepreneurial, and it doesn't mean that you just have a startup. I know someone mentioned a startup before. It can be. Entrepreneurial, as we say, poduzetništvo or preduzetništvo, depending on which variant of the language you speak. It means preduzeti nešto, which means taking action, being action-minded. So when you see something, you take action as opposed to just walking by and say, oh yeah, well, that's nice, yeah. Actually doing something about it. And we instill that culture in young people to take action as opposed to talk about it and so on. Striving for excellence. Bosnia is a small country. Apparently we have 3.5 million people. To be honest with you, there's probably only about 2.5 million people in Bosnia. Lucky if it's somewhere around there. So with 2.5 million people, you can't pump out volumes of whatever you want to do. We can't even grow enough plums to produce more rakia than Serbia, or whatever it might be. The point is, we have to focus on quality. And some of you already have businesses, and I think Ada knows this very well. If you want to be competitive in the world, you have to focus on quality. So what we want to instill is focus on quality, not quantity. Integrity, because we're all surrounded by people who have a lack of integrity. We know what lack of integrity looks like, so we try to instill by projecting the best examples from our society, by being great role models, by being great mentors and saying, I am going to lead with my actions and I'm going to show you what it means to be a person with integrity, not just with words, but also with action. Embracing diversity. People talk about diversity all day long and what it means to be diverse in Canada, but I can tell you one thing, diversity in Bosnia isn't just about having one Serb, one Croat, one Bosniak, because proportionally in terms of population, we just don't have enough Croats to have one Croat for one Bosniak for one Serb. Neither do we have enough of these. So I think that's a completely wrong approach to diversity. Diversity for me means being inclusive in everything that we do, in how we communicate, in how we solve problems, in how we make people feel comfortable about who they are, what they want to be, and all of their aspirations in life. So we instill that in our students as well. And most importantly, we serve the community. That means we're not doing this for ourselves, we're doing this to better other people's lives. But along the way, when you're helping people, you're also helping yourself, because you're also developing a whole lot of skills that will help you in life and so on. So where do you come into play? You can see this nice little car in the middle, that's the foundation. On the left-hand side over here is we have three key things that are very important to the development of our country. We have this thing called investment capital. We have this thing called network capital and knowledge capital. These three things are very, very important pillars of developing any country. And what we're trying to do is, all that knowledge, investment, and network that you have, we want to sit in that car and drive that vehicle throughout Bosnia, disseminating what you know, the networks that you've built, how to conduct research at a very high level, how to develop new businesses, how to start companies, how to work in the fintech industry. You can transfer that knowledge and you can help people build careers in Bosnia, and some of you already have done that before. You've started companies, you built that. We have that capital and we can do amazing things. On the other end, we have a whole bunch of programs that enable you to do that, so that you don't have to start a whole new non-for-profit. You can come in and say, hey, I am really good at public speaking and I want to teach young people in Bosnia how to present. I want to teach them how to sell the shit out of something. They can be the best salespeople in the world. Or I want to teach them how to conduct research, or I want to teach them something else. You can do that. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to know a little bit more than the guy below you, and that's enough. So we provide the vehicle for you to do that, and you can get involved. Our network is huge. As I said, 40 plus countries, and there are people in some countries that you wouldn't believe, including Kenya. So you can see, someone asked me, is that anomaly? Why did you color Kenya? So interestingly enough, a few years ago, we got a donor that just popped up in our system, and I'm like, Dragana Marinkovic, Kenya. I'm like, this has to be fraud. This can't be true. Well, I jumped on LinkedIn. I'm like, shit, there really is a Dragana Marinkovic, and shit, she really does live in Kenya, and she works for a Kenyan company. So of course I reached out to her and I said, hey, how did you end up in Kenya? Like, what's going on? And so she explained to me that she was working for a sustainable forestry company, doing some amazing stuff. And she's now working for Amazon, by the way, in Seattle. But she ended up in Africa first. My point is, we have people all over the world doing incredible stuff. There is no one in Bosnia that understands sustainable forestry. Nobody. They just go out there and chop trees as much as they can, and that's it, the end of the story. They say, ima dovoljno drveća, šta je problem? So we got Dragana involved initially to help people understand what sustainable forestry actually means in a global context. But of course, that didn't really take up with various people, so we got her involved in different actions and so on. But there are lots of people around the world, and some of these people will become your business partners and you can work with them. We have mentors. So when I talk about mentorship, we take professionals like yourself and we connect you with young people in Bosnia, and you can do one-on-one mentoring on whatever you like. Sometimes it's just a matter of being a good listener and listening to young people and understanding what they've gone through and being a good friend. And that means even if you're 20 years old, you can still be a mentor to someone in high school. You don't have to be some sort of expert or professor or dean of an engineering school to be a mentor. Anyone can be a mentor, and you can really make a difference. And we built this entire network of people. There's over 1,000 mentors supporting students all over the country. We organize these meetup events like we did today, over 150 of them so far, in various countries around the world. You will stumble across some unbelievable people doing incredible things, and slowly, people become involved. And I did some statistical analysis. 85% of people said they met at least one super useful contact. At least one, probably more. 95% of people said they thoroughly enjoyed the networking, even though they had various thoughts how bad it was going to be, because that's just not what they do. And 65% of people said they met someone who they do some form of business with. So I'm going to reach out to all of you in about 6 months' time and ask you, did you meet someone useful? Did you start a company or anything like that? But the chances are that you will do something quite incredible and you won't even know about it. We run a lot of webinars, so if you are an expert in any area and want to share some knowledge with young people, whether it's at a high school level, university level, or even at a PhD level, we can give you the means to do that, to inject that knowledge. And as I said, we've connected people all over the world. So this young lady here, Milica Grahovac, she's at Berkeley, very, very smart, PhD as well. Maybe you guys know Dunja Aksentijević. She's originally from Tuzla. She's really big on heart surgery as well. We also hosted, I know someone's from Split here, but Ivica Puljak is a famous Croatian physicist who became the mayor of city of Split. He's a good friend of mine. Of course, Ivica's not from Bosnia, but he loves Bosnia, so we got him involved as well. So if you know people that want to contribute and give us knowledge, please let us know. We have our own podcast where we try to change how people perceive Bosnia. So the first comment I got from people is, why is the podcast not in Bosnian? And I'm like, well, I don't need to tell Bosnian people how great Bosnian people are. I need to tell the world how great Bosnian people are. Why? Because I hate the fact that when you go to Google and type in Bosnia, the first thing you see some guy holding a sniper rifle shooting at someone. Or the Mostar Bridge collapsed. Or Sarajevo being shelled. That's not what we need Bosnia to be remembered by. I know that people live off war tourism, and that's fine. So do the Germans. The Germans still live off World War tourism. to some extent, but it's not their primary contributor to their GDP. So we need to move away from this, war tourism and focus on many other things that we have. So the point of the podcast is to get the stories of all these successful people from Bosnia that were doing unbelievable things, including Nina Arjanin here, who climbed Mount Everest, Edhem Custovic, who's basically at the top of the food chain in Apple, to Igor Stjepanovic, whose story was he ended up taking the first bus instead of the second bus. The second bus got hit by shell fire. He survived. The other bus didn't survive. He now runs 3 companies in Australia, and he's one of the biggest donors to our foundation. So you can find inspiration in these stories, but we also need to project success to be successful. And we need to do that by putting our best people forward. So don't be surprised if we reach out to you. During COVID, many of you went through hell, so did people in Bosnia. People in Bosnia were completely underprepared for educational online exercises. So what we did was, we obviously knew that we had all these experts around the world that were great in digital education. We launched literally within 2 weeks the largest program to teach teachers how to teach online. And we thought if we reach 100 teachers, that'll be amazing. We had 6.5 fund distributed to students for research in Bosnia. So in Canada, 20,000 doesn't even get you a door open to a lab. But in Bosnia, you can do a fair bit with 20,000 bucks if you know how to do it. The point is, we're growing this community. The judges are researchers of Bosnian origin all around the world. The students are research students all around the world, and they're connecting. Why? Because the long-term strategy is if you connect now, you will have people to collaborate with in 5 years that have some Bosnian connection. And ultimately, we're thinking strategically about the future and not what we can do now. I'll just jump through a few other things just to give you an idea of what else we do. So we don't just work with young people, we also work with teachers. And how do we work with teachers in Bosnia? 2 years ago, I was at a beach in Croatia hoping that no one would recognize me and I can just chill out for a day or two. And all of a sudden there's a guy from Trebinje, Edhem Custovic. I'm like, oh, how the hell do you find me here? But turns out that was the best thing that happened, because this guy, Vedran, he's actually from, he spent some time in Canada here. Does anyone know Edhem Custovic or the Kapitanovic family? No? Okay. They're also up here in Canada. I can't remember which city. But Vedran worked in an international school in Stuttgart, and he said to me, hey, we have this program, like we pay teachers to come and teach for a year in Stuttgart and learn about the latest techniques in teaching. And all of our teachers come from New York and London because apparently that's prestigious. But I'm pretty influential at the school, and I'm pretty sure we can get 1 or 2 positions for people in Bosnia. And that's all he needed to tell me. So within 2 weeks, we launched a call. We reached out to teachers in this network that we built, and we sent 2 teachers to Stuttgart for 12 months. Both of these teachers are now back in Bosnia with the latest techniques back in their schools, slowly implementing change through the system. So grassroots initiatives that bring about change. We have a huge researcher community that we've built on LinkedIn. If you're in research, you should definitely join this community. 1,500 researchers. We established a really important award. Hand up if you know who Vera Schneider is. Anyone heard of Vera Schneider? 1 person? 2 people? Okay. Why should you know about Vera Schneider? Because Vera Schneider, or Vera Popovic Schneider, was a woman from Sarajevo. She was born in the early 20th century, so 1900 and somewhere there, beginning of that. And she ended up becoming the first female mathematician in Bosnia. She was the first woman to publish a research paper in Bosnia. She was the first woman to be a dean of any faculty, not just engineering or mathematics, any faculty in the whole of Yugoslavia. But most importantly, she ended up spending several years in France, in Henri Poincaré's lab in Paris, which was a very famous lab at the time. And she was given numerous offers to stay in France in the 1920s, but she decided to come back to Sarajevo because they were starting a school to teach people mathematics at that level. Now that is a very important story. Vera Schneider was forgotten, just like many other people were forgotten for history who made enormous contributions to our society, but they're no longer the hot thing on the market. So what we did was, I found out that Vera Schneider had a grandson, and her grandson, his name is Dragan Huterer, who happens to be a world-class astrophysicist at the University of Michigan. Now you wouldn't know that because his surname is not Schneider. His name is Huterer, and Huterer doesn't really sound like a Bosnian, Croatian, or Serbian surname, so she wouldn't really discover it. But I ended up digging, and I found this guy, and I just reached out to him. I sent him this enormous email. Who I am, what I do, where I'm from, his grandma's the best, I'm just hoping this guy's going to send me an email back saying, all right, man, take it easy. He sent me an email back an hour later, just as long as my email. He was shocked that I found, how the hell did I find him? How do I know about his grandma? But long story short, a year later, we launched an award called the Vera Schneider Award, and it rewards young female scientists in Bosnia with 5,000 Bosnian marks to attend any conference that they want to attend. So this award is now annual. We've done, I think, 3 or 4 iterations of it. That's her grandson right there. He came back from Michigan. He came to Sarajevo and he gave the first award to Zorana Štaka and another student there. So that's a pretty impressive story, yeah. And I'll just finish up very quickly, but for those of you that are interested in entrepreneurship and are entrepreneurs by nature, if you want to contribute, we also have an entrepreneurship program. This program was started on the basis of what I taught engineers in Australia. So it's basically a 12-week crash course on how to be an entrepreneur, how to design things people want to use. We've run this program since 2016, but this program became so successful that this program is now running in this exact shape and form in about 13 other countries around the world because the model works quite well. Every year we run it. Every year we take about 30 to 50 students in, young people. They create some products. Most of the time they fail, but every once in a while they succeed. There are a couple of them now that have $2 or $3 million businesses. Not huge businesses, but the point here is we're creating grassroots knowledge so that in the future, when they work with people who are entrepreneurial, they will know what to do. So you can participate in that. We organize conferences all the time, every year. We've organized 7 international conferences on a volunteer basis. We've brought over 3,000 people from Bosnia to these conferences. And what we do that's very, very important is we don't just allow people from Sarajevo to register for the conference. Because what will happen is people in Sarajevo have 1 million more chances at life than people in Mostar do, than people in Tuzla do, and other parts. And I'm not even mentioning small towns, for example, like Ljubuški, or Zvornik, or Živinice, or other places around the country that just don't have the same access. So what we do is we restrict how many people can register for the conference, and we pay for all expenses. We pay for young people to come from, say, Bihać or Cazin. We pay for their bus, we pay for their accommodation, we pay for their food, and we pay for their registration of the conference, because financial barriers cannot stop people from being the best version of themselves. So it takes a lot of cash and a lot of effort to do that, and you can see that we've had people from 37 towns and cities or municipalities attend our conferences. And last year we invested over 100,000 Bosnian marks into the conference there. So the latest one is in Banja Luka. So this is going to happen next month. So in Banja Luka we're running a conference, and we're bringing young people from Banja Luka who are experts around the world back into Banja Luka so they can influence the next generation of young people over here. This guy here in the middle, Mladen Veletic, he was the youngest PhD to graduate in Bosnia. I think he got his PhD at age 26 in Norway. He's published some unbelievable papers in super high impact factual journals, including this young lady here who works for Apple, and she grew up in Bosanski Petrovac, which is, anyone here from Petrovac? No? It's a tiny place, like literally. There's hardly anyone living there. But she ended up growing up in Petrovac. She ended up moving to Banja Luka to study engineering. She was hands down one of the worst students, she will tell you that. But she now works at Apple, and she's worked at Intel and Apple, and she wants to talk to people that it doesn't matter whether you feel you're smart or not, it's about having the drive to continue to keep going. So this is going to be a wonderful event next month, so if you're in Bosnia, come and join us. And our biggest mission moving forward is an endowment fund. People know what endowment funds are in Canada, right? Yes? No? Okay. In Bosnia they're called vakuf, and they're not very well administered. So our goal is to build an endowment fund. It's going to be the first educational endowment fund. And I know when I say, people say, are you crazy? I want to build $1 billion endowment fund. And I'm going to do that before I die, unless I get struck by a lightning bolt or my plane goes down, God forbid. But that's my goal. I want to do that by age 60. I want to build $1 billion endowment fund from which we will fund all of these educational extracurricular activities for people in Bosnia. So when you're super talented and you say, I got a scholarship to Oxford, but I didn't get a scholarship for accommodation, now I can't go to Oxford. I don't want that kid not to go to Oxford just because he couldn't afford the accommodation. I want to be able to say, here it is. You go to Oxford and you be part of that community, and just remember to come back to this community and contribute. So we're working on this at the moment, and it's going to be registered in the United States. And the messages that I want to leave you at the end, because people always say to me, why should I contribute when no one contributed to me? And why should I contribute when no one's going to recognize that contribution? So the number one point is, you're going to be sacrificing, and don't expect compassion from everyone, because people just don't care. Everyone has their own thing in life, so whatever you do, they're going to be like, yeah, so what? Just keep doing that thing, don't bother me with it. You're going to be giving a lot, and not everyone's going to say thank you. You're going to be making a difference, and not everyone's going to see it. My own father didn't see what my brother and I were doing for a long time, and now he's like, oh, it's so amazing what you're doing. Yeah, but for 4 years you were just telling me, why are you traveling so much? And then you're shaping future leaders, but they may not even know that they're becoming leaders. At some point they will have that self-reflection and they'll realize they're making a difference. So if you can accept the above 4 points, then you will go in and you will do something and you won't be disappointed. Because the worst thing that happens to everyone is, I've been doing all of this stuff and I'm disappointed because people just don't realize what we're doing. So I'll leave it at that. This is me. By the way, I'm originally from Tuzla, but my family's originally from this place called Gatsko. Anyone know where Gatsko is? Herzegovina? Yeah. So I've never been to Gatsko before because I have to say it's a shithole. But it wasn't always a shithole, because my dad told me once upon a time, before they built this power plant there was a beautiful river running through. And I wanted to go back to this place where my grandfather was born. And so I went back there. That's me on the left when I was a little kid in Switzerland as a refugee. That's me now finally as a grown man doing what I need to do. But the last message I'll leave you with is basically our drive and our ability to persevere through the toughest of times is well proven. We all know that. All of you have gone through hell to get to where you are today. And we should continue to do that in a constructive and a community-driven way. So I'll leave you with that. Please, if you want to be involved with our foundation, reach out to myself and Nina. Thank you very much from me. Hopefully that wasn't too long and too draining, but thank you very much for listening to me, and hopefully that inspires you to become a change maker as well.